I hope you guys are ready for our next panel. In this session, speakers are going to discuss the advantages of fully decentralized versus non-decentralized blockchains, consensus models, as well as layer 2 and layer 1 networks that have emerged in recent months, including Apptos, Solana, Sui, Polygon, Starkware, and Zksynk. Is multichain the future? What will infra-blockchain look like in the coming years? Please welcome our moderator, Cohen, from managing editor at Cointelegraph, and the rest of our panelists, Todd Miller, VP Business Development and Partnerships at ChromaWay, Shauli Rejwan, Managing Partner at Masterkey VC, Alon Muroch, Protocol Lead at SSV.Network, Yair Cleper, Co-founder and CEO of Lava Network, and Moriah Waterland, a blockchain lead engineer at a startup.
Good morning, welcome everyone. So nice to see you and be here, and glad you'll make it. So, my name is Alex. I work at Cointelegraph. Hopefully you read our news. If you don't, then do come over and check them out. And now I would like to pass it on to all of you so that you can make a quick introduction. Let's go one by one, Todd.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm Todd Miller. I'm the VP of Partnerships and Business Development at ChromaWay. We're a layer 1 blockchain. We're a little bit different than most EVMs. We built our chain from the ground up. We're rooted in relational databases and use more of a cloud compute model for consensus, which I think we'll have a nice discussion today on.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shauli Rejwan. I'm the managing partner of Masterkey VC. We're a global VC. I'm based here in Israel. My partners are based in San Francisco, New York, Puerto Rico, Portugal, some other places. Also co-founder of ICC and the Israeli Companies Forum.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alon. I'm a lead protocol developer at SSV.Network. It's a layer 0 for Ethereum. What we do is decentralized infrastructure for Ethereum staking.
Hi, my name is Moriah Waterland. I'm a blockchain architect, and I'm working for a US-based company, Appreciate. And we're working closer to level 0, trying to work between blockchains.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yair Cleper. I'm a founder and CEO of Lava Network. In Lava, we're building a decentralized RPC infrastructure. And actually, I'm celebrating 1 year since the first conference in crypto. So very excited to be here.
Yeah, who remembers those times? Give them a round of applause, please. So, okay, let's kick off this discussion. Obviously, we're going to talk about blockchain infrastructure and all aspects of it, but I would really like to concentrate on perhaps the two most important things in kind of scalability and speed and security. So my first question would be, so can we ensure that both scalability and security can be met? Maybe we can look ahead into the future slightly. With regards to that, Todd, if you can kick us off.
You know, I think it's a struggle. I mean, I think we've seen that in the last 10 years of infrastructure development around blockchain, around trying to balance performance and security. Again, I think people are familiar with like the number of MasterCard transactions per second versus the blockchain. And if we're going to scale, I think we should be open to alternative infrastructures that that can balance the two. And I know we're going to get into some different discussions today about workarounds that we've come up with, but I think we can ask some fundamental questions about is the infrastructure that most dApps are running on today where we'll be in 5 years from now.
Yeah, so I think in general there is a misconception here about decentralization and scalability. The way we approach it within Lava is the fact that you don't limit yourself as a node runner to the ability only to interact with a centralized provider. In Lava, we combine a decentralized way within an off-chain to connect between peer-to-peer market within an app chain as a settlement layer. So it means that problems of latency and things like that are not part of the drawbacks that we see in an infrastructure. And I think scalability today is a very core issue in crypto because it eliminates the values of Web3.
I think it depends on the trade-off you're trying to make, right? Ultimately, you can be highly scalable and limit the amount of people or general entities that can run your nodes and actually sync to the network. So for example, EOS was probably kind of an outlier in that regard where for the most part you couldn't even catch up with the network because there were so much transactions on it. I think for the most part it seems like the solution is to separate between processing and data. So what you see in Ethereum today is a move towards layer one holding the data or data availability, if anyone knows the concept, and basically kind of offshooting the processing towards L2s. And that could be both decentralized but also secure.
The way I see it, actually, it's a bit different. So we're always going to need to compromise on something. And like if you want a super hyper scalability, you can do it centralized, right? So, but if we wanted to do it decentralized, we want to build the infrastructure. And what we're talking now is really technical because most of the people like in the future will not going to need to manage their own keys, probably, or like not going to need to handle so many things that people are here handling, the early adopters of crypto. And that's why there is so much room for innovation. Because when we're looking on different applications and different layers and taking different compromises or preferring other functionalities, that's part of the thing that we need to understand, that that's actually the opportunity for innovators to come and to innovate and for users to start using it and to see how it's going to be involved.
So I agree a lot with you in general with that assessment. And I think that's one of the reasons why it makes sense to have different blockchains. Like Bitcoin, part of Bitcoin's slowness in processing transactions is its security. And so I think that it's always going to be a compromise. And so if you have different blockchains and layer twos also that can help decrease risks, maybe you have a layer two where you have less critical data on it, right? You can choose between, constantly make that choice between security and scalability and speed. And so I think that over time, all of those will get better. Like we're getting better at securing all of the layers. And so it's just going to evolve, but I think there'll continue to be multiple blockchains that would serve different needs.
So, quick question for all of you. Do you think it's even appropriate to ask what's more important currently, security or scalability? Or like shouldn't that even be a question? Like everyone just does their own thing, each blockchain is developing their own way. Like maybe a question for all of you.
Well, again, security is a derivation of what, right? I mean, what threat levels are you talking about? Is it hacking or is it a government trying to topple a blockchain? It's a whole different ballgame. And so the more you go to the kind of, the top of the pyramid, if you will, the more you'll lean on decentralization and in some cases privacy as well to circumvent government players or even semi-government players to censor or attack and so on and so forth. And by the way, it's not always illegal, right? I mean, one of the biggest risks today on Ethereum is censorship, and it comes from the government simply going to Coinbase and Kraken and saying, stop those transactions. And so I think that...
the nodes.
Sorry?
Or just telling the nodes you're not the compliance.
Yeah, well, it's basically the same thing. They're running like 60% of the network. So I think that that's, by the way, connects very well to why you need multiple blockchains. I don't think it's necessarily for the application. It's for the most part the same way we do in business, right? You have the big mammoth that moves slowly, and you have the smaller startups moving very fast. And so you have to have that kind of line of multiple solutions so that you could circumvent those types of threats. And they're very, very real. It's not that far-fetched that as I said, the US government goes to Coinbase and Kraken and says, stop that transaction.
And I think there's a minimal level of security that would be for any blockchain to be relevant, but I think that focusing for a lot of the blockchains on scalability, while at least maintaining that, makes sense for the immediate future, and it'll balance as it goes.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I also wonder from an architecture perspective or from a programmatic perspective, are we going to be able to code our way towards both performance, security, and, for example, with consensus algorithms, I think we'll talk about in a few minutes about maybe proof of stake or delegated proof of stake or, much more sort of complex, algorithms. But are we going to be able to overcome what is really at the base a social consensus? Meaning that, we just are all sort of experiencing the breakdown of somebody like FTX, which had, is presumably in this industry, yet had no transparency with regard to their transactions, their reserves, and so forth. And that at a certain point, are we sort of over-engineering the back end of our blockchain ledgers and to try to overcome what is really a human problem? So.
I think with no FTX today. No, I'm just kidding. Just to put a pin in it, I think when I came first to the industry, everyone was talking about the trilemma. And I think we're not going to solve, as the trilemma suggests, all the different components on the three components, but the trade-off should start looking at the very core level of what disputes the Web3 values today, which is going to be the key for the next evolution and scalability of the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. Actually, it's, when you're thinking of what do you actually want to scale? Do you want to scale the amount of transaction, or do you want to scale the amount of data, or what do you actually want to look for? And that's kind of a thing, one of the big question mark. Is it Web3, or are we just a blockchain that handling currencies? And FTX didn't have any scalability problems because it was centralized. They just showed people something that they wanted to present, but in the back end it was probably not back. So how can we solve that? And maybe that's part of the opportunities here of not proof of reserves, because that's not really a thing, but how can you prove to someone that a real centralized entity really holding an asset or providing them the access to that?
Well, I think definitely proof of liabilities and debt or holdings is possible. If you can use zero knowledge proofs for privacy and you can make it happen. I don't think it's on just a pure technical decision. It's mostly, I think, self-regulation or maybe later on real regulation. But it is possible. I think that for the most part, it's the same old kind of question. It's human failure. It's not technology failure. And again, FTX will happen in the future the same ways as I'm pretty sure banks will fail in the future as well. It's kind of the same thing.
Definitely, zero knowledge is probably one of the most fascinating parts because we see that glows. Just to set the ears of people here, one of the things that's really interesting in zero knowledge and makes it so fit to decentralized environment is just the fact that you don't if computers want to have some layer of trust or they're connecting with each other in the old type of internet, that's basically said that they trust each other. They have a connected wire. Or some protocol to connect with each other. In decentralized environment that everybody can interact with others, basically you want to trust and to build trust. And zero knowledge is perfect for that. And there are unlimited possibilities of application that could go from it. But just the big question that referred to you, Alon, do you really think that will be the next bull, or is it going to be
from ZKP?
ZK going to combine into Ethereum, or is ZK going to be an additional layer? How it's going to work?
So the big push today on Ethereum with ZK is for the most part L2s. it's very complicated. I'm definitely not an expert. I think today you have basically two types of solutions. You have the quick and dirty solution, and you have the very, very complex, amazing solution, and we're somewhere in the middle. There's great push towards making it a reality. If they make it, there are some trade-off, but if they make it, it's amazing. And that's one probably of the biggest layers of scalability for Ethereum today. By the way, literally, I think yesterday or the day before that, on the Ethereum testnet, they first tested out data blobs, which is the basis for everything we're talking about in terms of L2s. So it is becoming a reality. It's not. It's not far-fetched. I think that the big push will see L2's adoption increase the next bull run, because today we're talking about very, very cheap transactions on Ethereum. When there's cheap transactions on Ethereum, there's no need to use L2s, but when they're very expensive, then you need to use them. So adoption will be there. I think staking in general is going to be there as a very prominent kind of bull market, maybe adopter or pusher. But yeah, I mean, those types of things are evolving very, very fast. Applied cryptography in blockchain is probably promoted the cryptography world, years in advance. Like before that was very nascent. It was very kind of behind the scenes, and today it is in the fronts.
Yeah, I was just going to add one issue maybe Shauli said before, to track back a little bit around the fact that, I mean, the purpose of the blockchain and the promise of it was supposed to be about transparency. And if we're going to bring more mainstream players and a broader set of participants into Web3, we need to make the ledger more accessible. I mean, it was interesting, the presentation before ours around chain analysis. You can see all the work that needs to be done to be able to report on what is going on chain and so forth. And I think like developing tools, I know from partners that we speak to, it could be banks or financial institutions or other supply chain providers. They still have not accepted the fact that transparency is a problem that blockchain can, either transparency is important, or secondly, that blockchain can provide that. And I think like it's a little bit inaccessible to them right now. So how do we make these tools more accessible and so forth through explorers or through reporting? One thing that we've tried to do at ChromaWay is our data structures based in relational databases. So you can query, you can index things that the enterprise world or the mainstream world can do better. So I'm sure there's lots of other strategies around that.
I think one of the other things that will make layer 2 blockchains having more usability for the end users, like having people that want to integrate, they already have a tool suite that they can use with that blockchain to easily do NFT contracts that would have some of the complexity that they need. And as these ecosystems emerge on the different blockchains, especially, I think that the level 2 ones will be able to refine them more because they have more freedom. And as that happens, I think that some of the layer 2 will kind of end up with being like niche blockchains for this industry. This is my guess.
Okay, we actually touched upon sort of decentralization and transparency in a bit, and regarding proof of stake and delegated proof of stake, and maybe we can also mention running on nodes and delegating the nodes to be run by someone else. Where do you think the future is? Should we be moving toward giving essentially up control over the funds or our activities to bigger companies, or should we be doing it ourselves and be more secure? Shauli, you wanna?
So my point of view is always go to non-custodial. I'm pretty conservative in the fact that centralization should not be existing in crypto. In crypto, in blockchain, in Web3, it's just if you want to build or rebuild society or rebuild fundamental internet, it should be far different from what is already exists. And the non-custodial DeFi, that's a thing that we're focused. we never invested in something centralized. Also we haven't seen a great opportunity, but it's also not part of our investment focus. We're trying to take things to the extreme. Also, having said that, not something that like, if you want to operate in the States, you need to be compliant to the rules, right? If you want to serve and if you want to go to the mass adoptions, you have to be compliant and you have to obtain regulation. And in some places there isn't regulation, or like the regulation is not yet been written. You need to basically understand what is how the centralized regulation, stands behind it. And if you understand the essence of it, it's pretty easy to implement. And if you're coming in good faith and not want to scam people. So
I have a follow-up question for that. Do you think mass adoption is possible without custodial wallets with the current technology?
Current technology, it's something pretty funny, but the reason we're doing here is like all of us. The reason here that we're all pioneers in the space. Like Yair just said, like he came here last year, but look at this company now. It's huge. It's a massive company. Like people don't know, but you probably haven't seen it. But the workshop that we're just giving was packed because everybody wants to come and hear what they're doing. They're really doing something innovative. And in crypto, when you're doing, like you're creating a new value and a real value, it's like a black hole. It sucks you. So yeah, there is tons of place to create. Based on current technology, mass adoption cannot even interact with it. It just requires so much adoption and so much to learn and to come in a different perspective. We're working in the company's forum, try to explain regulators how to regulate us and like not to kill the Israeli ecosystem. And you really need to find these people in the regulator offices, and they exist, that coming with open minds and really willing to think and take the extra mile, because it's required tons of time to dedicate to understand it. It's like the average person takes him like roughly 4 or 5 years to get in, like not the day he bought Bitcoin, because he bought it probably in a centralized exchange, but at the day that he really had a non-custodial solution, he read the white paper, he started to do some things, got into DeFi, went down the rabbit hole. It's a process.
Just to add on top of that, and thank you for the kind word, Shauli. In the last year, actually, exactly 1 year ago, when we came into the ecosystem, I told my co-founder, I think it's the peak. Unfortunately, I was right. But in the last, the important signals that I see over the last half a year, since we're in a bear market, obviously, it's that every conference I was attending to noted that they increased the developers and engineers between 2 times to 5 times in the year before. So I think that's a very promising signals of the market today, and we're growing accordingly.
I think we're already seeing mass adoption. I don't think we need to expect it somewhere in the future. There is mass adoption. There's probably upwards of 100 million people using crypto today. You definitely need centralized wallets because not everyone can manage it without it. But going back to your original question about delegated proof of stake and proof of stake, first of all, I think it's one of the key features that people can relate to on blockchain, which is really, really great. Passive income is something very interesting for most people. And I think for the most part, delegated proof of stake is a hindrance. It's not. It's a feature of technical limitations. It's not necessarily something you need to strive for. But in general, most staking is delegated, just not the way you think of it.
I also want to touch upon something that you mentioned earlier about zero knowledge proofs and how maybe the developers that are coming into the fold are partially working on that, and maybe the optimistic rollups as well, optimistic rollups. So do you think we should be actually targeting that sort of technology to take the next step? Like, do you differentiate between optimistic and ZKs, and what do you think the kind of the future will be? What will be the next step? Who would like to go first? Right.
I'm hoping for ZK. I think there's a lot of development happening there, and I think that there's a decent chance that the more the more we can have ZK in the layers syncing up, and then also data going in and out of the blockchain, like when pings are put on. We can partially reclaim privacy, and that would be huge.
Yeah, I was going to add just quickly. I agree on the zero knowledge proof. The optimistic rollups I have concerns about, just because I think Laura mentioned that maybe the main driver for it is really the fee problem on EVMs and so forth. So we're trying to develop like a workaround for a basic mousetrap that has, cost and scalability limitations. So, I think we should look more closely as is the climb worth the view on that. So.
Layer 2s based on ZK are not necessarily guaranteeing privacy at all. It's a bit different use of zero knowledge proofs. I do think that simplicity is a very, very important thing in such a complex system. ZKs are not simple at all. There's very few people who understand how they work. Optimistic rollups are dead simple, and maybe not their proofs, but the optimistic part is very, very simple. And yeah, it is solving the gas problem. It's a big problem. If anyone remembers, back in 2021, at the peak of kind of the bull market, where we're talking about 300 or 400 GUI gas fees, which is a gas price, sorry, which is crazy. We're talking about probably tens of dollars for a simple ERC20 transaction. So it's absolutely crucial for scale, but it's also absolutely crucial for the future of the architecture of Ethereum. And it kind of paves the way for others. And it's also, by the way, paves the way, I think, in terms of interoperability with other blockchains, because L2s, in a sense, are another blockchain, if you will. A bit different, but if you will, you could say that. In terms of the user experience, it's very similar. So you're putting something in, it goes to another place, you interact with that, you can return it. So it will also pave the way in that sense. Although interoperability is a much more complex thing.
And just a quick question on that, and maybe some of the technical architects on the panel can respond. I mean, is one of the problems with the rollups is that we don't have finality, because someone can raise their hand later and say, well, I have a question about this proof.
Right, so finality in what sense?
Well, like transaction finality.
Yeah. I think that, well, you have you have economical finality, which is up until a year and a half ago was everything that everyone hoped for. Today you have an actual finality, although again, finality is a bit of a more complex term. I think that one of the promises of ZK is that finality. With optimistic rollups, again, it's optimistic. So you have very, very strong economical finality. But it has some trade-offs in terms of waiting periods and stuff like that. So again, every design decision is a trade-off.
Which one do you think is?
Arbitrum is probably, Arbitrum, in terms of optimistic rollups, Arbitrum is, I think, the only one who actually has proofs. Optimism, I don't think, have proofs. Or at least they have proofs, but they cannot on-chain verify them. Arbitrum is, I think, does, if I remember correctly, and they're very, very big. They're scaling up. In terms of ZK, well, obviously we have the Israeli connection here. Starkware is a pioneer in that. But it's even not for the average Joe, even for the very, very technical Joe, it's very difficult to understand how ZK work, and it's not a good thing in that sense. Of course, 5 years from now, obviously, when the technology will become more mass adopted, it will become easier to understand. People will write about it and so on. I just think it's a longer term. It's like, you know, if you're trying to put up the roadmap for scale, right? So you'll have, at the beginning, we tried to scale up L2s. That doesn't work. Okay, so then we said, let's use L2s. Okay, how do you do L2s? So you had state channels and like super complicated things that never stood a chance. And then people realized, okay, you can do something very simple, which is optimistic rollups. And then once you have optimistic rollups, people said, okay, maybe you can do it in a ZK way. But the roadmap is optimistic rollups work now, ZK will work in the future, and you have to have both. And in the future, you'll have sharding, which is even crazier than ZK. So, so all of those things are in line. By the way, even making optimistic rollups scale. You need to make a lot of changes in the L1 side, which even that is becoming complex. Data availability and sampling and all of those types of things. And so it's not necessarily just when ZK are ready, it's more of when are they ready well enough, and that's going to be in the future. And in the meantime, we cannot pay 500 Gwei for a transaction. So, yeah.
I'm actually really bullish on ZK, but not for layer 2. So basically, I think that there's so much room in our day-to-day life or online interactions for anonymity. And also, like, you don't need to hold that anonymity for like all way long, but just for part of it, let's say bits, let's say I don't want, like, if people heard Aaron's lecture a few minutes before. So basically they can detect everything. They're combining multiple channels of sources of intelligence, and that scares. That scares. Like, guys, and they're professionals, and they're doing it for our own security and everybody's security, and they're doing a great job. But ZK can change some things that could provide us that layer of anonymity. And basically, when you're thinking like back in the old days, or like the cyberpunks, when they were like speaking of like why you really need anonymity or privacy online, it's because the real belief is, like, the old belief was that people could not really share their true or honest opinions globally in a wide range, because they're always going to be afraid that it will come back against them. And when we're talking, just like when you're doing everything that like we're doing online, it could be e-commerce, it could be communication, and some other things. Like, we don't want to leave these evidence for good and to make them like always be there out on the blockchain. So yeah, I bullish on ZK, but not as a scaling solution.
Okay, a quick follow-up question. Is it appropriate then to say that we kind of need to give up privacy in order to get adoption for the industry? Would that be your kind of way of thinking about how we develop the future in terms of infrastructure?
On what level, right? If you're using Coinbase, that's it. You don't have anonymity, right? But I think as long as there's a way for you to be anonymous, then that's enough for keep check and balances. I don't think the average Joe cares about it until they care about it. That's a big thing. But for the most part, if you look at, again, it's kind of the 80-20 thing, right? So 80% of the people don't care about it, but they only represent probably 20% of the assets. 80% of the assets really care about privacy. And so that's why you see, for example, in DeFi, most of the money there is institutional, it's not retail. The biggest address holders in Ethereum and Bitcoin are not retail. And so they do care about privacy. And by the way, privacy doesn't have to be just anonymity. Privacy can be even to eliminate things like front running and squashing transactions. Like, if you can hide the data in some way, you can prevent people from attacking it. It's not just being anonymous in cyberpunk and living in your parents' basement with a hoodie on. It's very practical. And by the way, one of the biggest fights we'll have probably with regulators is around privacy and anonymity. And that's definitely a hill to die on, because if you compromise that, there is no blockchain. If you take that away and you take decentralization away, there is no blockchain. And so, although there's a very few people that actually care about it, those are the ones that actually built this stuff. And so, it is a hill to die on. It's super, super important, because otherwise, it's just we just build a sophisticated banking system. So,
I beg to differ with the 80-20. I think privacy, it's what brought me to the industry, and I think that in general we've seen, like 2 weeks ago, Infra and MetaMask is collecting all the information of the user, which was kind of known, but now it's officially. We've seen censorship in the summer. Spoke a bit about Tornado Cash. And what actually was very interesting for us is the fact that you mentioned before the Gwei price just popping up 80% when one of the infrastructure players is down. I spoke about I mentioned Infura earlier. And I think that those kind of components are making the future of decentralization, privacy, censorship resistant, and everything that Web3 is about, not going to happen. And I think when we are decentralizing the components, we need to make sure that we keep the values, we keep the privacy for the people, whoever wants it, whoever not. And I totally for regulation. I think that, when I first came to crypto, everyone's talk about money laundering and darknet, and it's definitely not about that. But you need to work together with the regulators to give, tools in order to still observe and monitor the industry. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, to me, it's a continuum, because I think we're in an evolutionary period here with we're trying to work with regulators. For example, on the real world asset side, I mean, we are dealing with AML and KYC. It's hard to shield names of investors. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to disclose everything about that investor and so forth. But if we're going to expand into new segments and provide, real value in financial markets and so forth, I think we have to be realistic about the compromises that need to be made.
I agree with what you said about it being a hill to die on. There are compromises we have to make, but I think as long as the people that are building it and evolving it keep the privacy as one of the core principles and make sure that for the people that want that, it will be available, I think it's going to evolve reasonably well.
You can compromise on the businesses. You cannot compromise on the technology, because that's it's not even a slippery slope. It's just a cliff. I don't think we should always try to pamper to regulators. I think regulators need to be educated and explain exactly what they're doing. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about technology, we're not just talking about technology, we're talking about disruption. And disruption in its very core is disruptive. And so I think that it's not about being a cyberpunk with a hoodie on. It's about being very realistic about what we're doing. There are things on the business level you can compromise on. I don't think Coinbase can be anonymous. It's not their business model. But I don't think you can compromise on the L1s. And since Coinbase is sleeping with everyone on L1s, then it becomes a problem, and then technology needs to understand how it's going to solve it. But again, I think that we should understand also the long-term kind of effects of what we're doing. I don't know why, but one of the key things that comes to mind right now, and it has nothing to do with blockchain, is anyone saw the NWA film? So there's a scene there, and NWA, who doesn't know, is an American rap project, I don't know, back in the 90s. One of the key kind of scenes there was NWA showing up for a concert and the police telling them what they can and cannot say, right? And obviously they disregard it and say what they want, get arrested, and so on and so forth. I don't know why it comes to mind, but the thing is that I think that if you're talking about a revolution, it has to be that. And some aspect of that can be a trade-off. Obviously today, rap is mainstream. But some of that has to kind of be a core of things that you do not compromise on. And I think decentralization, privacy are those types of things. Because otherwise you're just building, again, just a fancy financial system. And that's a crucial separation.
We say decentralization, we say trustless, but basically when we're looking on the infrastructure, it's not that trustless. We need still to rely on the government grid for electricity. And, miners could be kicked out from a country and then you see a drop in the mining power in one day. So that's the level of security. That's one thing. And when we're talking on the other side of like getting into and get to mass adoption, and people don't really understand crypto, and like takes them time to adapt, and they need these centralized solutions. So of course the government, if you're going to go and ask them what should we do, they're going to say, don't change anything. Like we already have a system, it works. Why do you want to change it? Or are you going to try to explain them and they'll say, no, but it's worked great. But that's the power we have here. That's the opportunity we have here. We need to build a real decentralized and trustless environment that could feedback that. we need to maintain it, and we have a protocol layer, and we can be off a compliance, or we could do some other things in that layer. But we decided it's not them, and that's how we can make a change.
What if we can promise you the following vision? What if we can say, the data should be signed cryptographically, and this is how you make sure that you have proof of data of what actually from the blockchain? What if the providers of the data could be held accountable for everything they providing to you, and they know that they can be slashed or jailed if they're not providing this stuff? And what if we're developing lazy blockchain to help with the finality time, because you don't need to make sure that the settlement is right away, but you need to make sure that the data have the scalability feature. By the way, all the answers for that in my lecture here afterwards, so it's a build-up.
I just, to Shauli, I mean, I agree with the vision, but I'm concerned, like the debate we're having around Twitter right now, or at least in the US, we're having it, I'm sure it's here also, that I think as a community, we can, have a discussion about what the different levels of decentralization are, what the levels of privacy are, to balance a whole set of like competing needs. So, I'm concerned about going it alone when the reality of the world we live in is the government has enormous power, and also that we have to balance off sort of competing values. So I think it really obtains to the systems we build in blockchain also.
Yeah, just to round up the conversation, it seems like we are in agreement that we would like to see a future where we do have control over our funds, over what we do, but unfortunately we'll have to make some trade-offs when it comes to especially governments and adoption, because we do need some regulation to help us along and to get to where we're ultimately heading. But there's some things that we would not like to compromise on, and I think decentralization of Ethereum and Bitcoin, that's definitely going to have to stay intact. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Fortunately, we're going to have to wrap up the conversation.
Thank you, Alex.